Welcome to Paranormal M, the channel where we explore the world beyond our understanding. Subscribe and turn on notifications to be the first to know about our latest unexplainable stories. We hope you're ready to be transported into a world beyond your wildest dreams. As the anniversary of my dad's passing approaches, it's impossible not to reflect on the dream I had around the same time last year. It was a dream that has stayed with me and felt incredibly vivid, even though I usually don't recall my dreams with such clarity. In the dream, I saw my father, and it was as if he was standing right in front of me. I could see him so clearly that it felt like I was wide awake, even though I was still asleep. This was surprising, as I tend to sense things rather than see them in my dreams. However, this dream was different, and I felt like I was truly seeing my father after so many years. What struck me the most was that he looked different. He had aged in a way that felt both realistic and unexpected. His hairline was higher, and his hair had turned gray, with wrinkles adorning his face. It was as if he had aged with time, even though he had been gone for so many years. In the dream, he didn't say anything, nor did he do anything. He just stood there, looking at me with a sense of calm and serenity. This was unusual, as he had been anything but serene in life. However, seeing him like this was also comforting in its own way. I lost my father when I was 12 years old, so it was almost like I got to meet him as an adult. The dream was a poignant reminder of his presence in my life, even though he was no longer physically with me. As I approached the 15th anniversary of his passing, I can't help but wonder if I'll have a similar dream this year. It's strange how these dreams can bring comfort and closure, even when we least expect them. My incredibly basic, unexplained moment in Theater 15. For a few years, I worked my way up at a local movie theater that I passionately loved. I was made management really quickly, the bare minimum amount of time it could be, and there were a lot of new responsibilities with it. I spent many late nights alone in the projection booth, which was a long, dark hallway to our 16-screen theater. And at night, around 1 to 3 a.m., depending on the last show and closing progress, one of the last things to do was to go up there and power everything down. And let me tell you, it was absolutely prime material for spookiness. All lights out, and just the bare lights of the theaters coming through the projection windows. Lights are on at night in theaters for the cleaning crew. And nothing. Nope. Not even one time did anything remotely interesting happen up there. I thought it was just fantastic atmosphere for a spooky moment, but nope. Just a cool, quiet, peaceful, dark place. Several times I thought about it and how wild it was to be alone throughout the theater late at night. As a horror paranormal fan, I always thought it would have been the perfect setting, and nothing ever happened really. Until one morning in Theater 15. One of my other jobs when I didn't work late was the opposite end of the spectrum. It was opening. So I got in about an hour and a half before the first show starts, went upstairs to power up the booth, prep our IMAX projectors, go downstairs and get candy and concession displays out. Make sure tills are ready, make sure everyone is arriving on time, and complete my walkthrough before doors unlocked a half hour before the first show. It was a lot, but you get a routine, and usually I was able to complete the full theater walkthrough before doors unlocked. On busier days, we would have a manager to help open, and today was one of those days. So, close the doors, unlocking, I'm scrambling to finish the walkthrough. Theater 15 is one of our bigger theaters. So on a walkthrough, we check lights, ceiling tiles, chairs, especially a list of our broken ones to make sure that they've been fixed, and overall smell and trash, etc. to see how the cleaning crew did. So I make my way to the theater. The pre-show music is playing, so booth has been taken care of and the audio sounds good. And I make my way to the top row and work my way down inspecting the theater. As I'm standing on the top row, I hear a distinct and heavy boot step running quickly, coming from right at the screen in front row. This was not a creak, a pop, or even a single thud. This was heavy footsteps on our hardwood floor, dashing from the side that I was on to the opposite side, right underneath the screen. My first thought wasn't even like, this is the ghost moment. I knew that the back of the screen is an alley, and it shares the alley with a restaurant. So at first I thought maybe the sound came from outside, because we do have an exit door right there where the sound started from. So I go back down to see if I hear more noise from outside, and as soon as I got down there, the row I was standing in, I hear even louder footsteps sprint right across the top row where I was standing. I'm now in the middle of these two instances and going, okay, no way. So I ran back up the stairs and got right up to the top row. Our theater has reclining seats, so half of the seats are now empty and extended areas for the chairs to recline. I check behind the top row where we have some extra floor space. No one can hide under the chairs. It's all wiring and electronics for the seats. I've had to fix them several times when someone comes loose. And I know that it definitely sounded like the original dash was inside, but it just seemed more likely it was noise from the alley. So last-ditch effort to explain the moment, I thought maybe someone was in the alley and someone was upstairs in the booth and I heard them, since I was at the top row. So I used my walkie. Hey management, is anyone at near booth 15? No, we're in the office. Do you need someone up there? My coworker asks. The GM was also there today doing scheduling. So I get doors unlocked, get back to the office, tell them my tale about how I tried to debunk it. And to this day, they tell new hirees about the ghost in 15. Do I think it? Nah, not enough that it's happened consistently or really anyone else for me to say that it could be something more than just a super weird moment. But that being said, and as one of the many paranormal moments I've experienced, I can't explain it. Ghost encounter. Once upon a time, my wife, who was my girlfriend at the time, and I decided to embark on a trip to Mexico. As we were not quite familiar with the place, we were offered to crash at a friend's home for a few days. The first couple of nights passed without any major incidents. However, it was on the third night when things took an unexplainable and terrifying turn. We were both lying on a mattress in the living room, trying to catch some much-needed rest after a long day of exploring the city. Suddenly, we both began to feel uneasy. It was as if someone was watching us from a distance. At first, we tried to brush it off, thinking it was just our imagination playing tricks on us. However, we couldn't shake off the feeling of uneasiness that had developed around us. As we lay there facing each other, I felt the slightest touch run down my spine. It was an eerie feeling, and I couldn't quite figure out what was causing it. And then, without warning, I felt something move around the bed to my wife's side. She started shaking uncontrollably, and I knew something was terribly wrong. I asked her what was wrong, and she replied, "It was on your side, but now it's behind me." We both felt a sense of dread wash over us as we realized that something sinister was at play. It was almost as if there was an invisible entity in the room with us, and it was moving around trying to make its presence known. To this day, we can't get over how we both felt the same thing at the same time. It was as if we were both connected to each other, and we could sense the presence of the entity together. We still wonder if anyone else has experienced something similar with another person. It left us with a deep and lasting impact. It was a reminder that there is so much more in this world that we don't understand, and sometimes the things that scare us the most are the things that we can't see. It was a chilling reminder that the world is full of mysteries, and sometimes those mysteries can be downright terrifying. Seeing my dead uncle in the chow hall when I went through basic training in the military. Let me tell you a story. It happened about 5 years ago when I was a mere 21 years old. At that time, I was young, restless, and eager to test my mettle by undergoing basic training. However, as luck would have it, My training didn't quite go according to plan. In fact, I was sent home before I could even graduate. But that's neither here nor there. What I want to talk about is a strange and eerie experience that occurred while I was waiting in line with my division to get my food. You see, at this time, I wasn't allowed to talk or even look around due to some strict rules that I don't quite recall the specifics of. But that didn't stop me from trying to sneak a peek over the counter to see what was going on. And that's when I saw him, my dead uncle, or at least someone who looks exactly like him. The facial features, the skin tone, and even the hair. It was all identical to my beloved uncle. Now, my uncle has passed away some time ago from what I believe was liver disease or some ailment. He had always been a drinker, you see, and would start his day off with a cold beer. You can imagine my shock and horror when I saw this man who resembled my uncle so closely. I went pale and couldn't even bring myself to speak with the cooks. My instructors noticed that I wasn't myself and asked if I was okay, but I couldn't bring myself to tell them what I had just seen. I was too spooked, too scared, and too overwhelmed by the experience. In truth, I was more spooked than sad, though I must admit I nearly cried when I saw him. My love for my uncle was so deep and strong, and to see someone who looked so much like him was both a comfort and a terror. To this day, I'm not entirely sure what I saw or why I saw it, but the memories of that strange and eerie encounter still haunts me to this very day. I've been dreaming of the same man. As I sit here and tell you my story, I can feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. It's a feeling that's become all too familiar to me. One that I've experienced ever since I was a little girl of 4 or 5. I've always been drawn to the supernatural, and I believe that's because I have a gift for attracting spirits. Now at age 21, I still have experiences on a daily basis, but there's one particular spirit that seems to haunt me above all others. I dream of him frequently, and it feels like he's always there, lurking in the shadows of my mind. I can't shake him, and I'm starting to wonder if he's just a figure of my imagination, but a real entity that's been following me for years. My first experience of him was in college. I had a dream that I was in a Russian hotel, and I saw him staring at me from across the room. He was grinning. His gray skin stretched taut over his bones. He wore black and white striped prison clothes, and there was a long cut across his neck. Little bits of black hair clung to his scalp, and his eyes were completely lifeless. They stared right into my soul, and it felt very cold, and it washed over me, and I'll never forget it. Since that day, I've had random moments of severe anxiety, frozen with fear, and constant nightmares about him. I know that he's haunting me, and I'm starting to fear for my own safety. As time's gone on, more and more things have started to happen. I got a scratch on my back one day, 3 long scratches on the wall. Handprints started appearing on my wall, and I could feel his presence around me all the time. The creepiest thing, though, is the knocking. Most nights, for 3 minutes straight, I'll hear 3 knocks on my window in a rhythmic pattern. It's like he's trying to communicate with me, to let me know that he's still there watching me. I know when he's around because I can feel his anger, and I can see his face staring at me, grinning. I'm doing anything I can to protect myself. I've tried cleansing, using crystals and spell jars, but nothing seemed to work. I cleanse my room regularly, but I can still feel his presence. I don't know what to do, and I'm starting to fear for my sanity. Is this all in my head, or is there something out there that's trying to hurt me? I saw a black-gray figure next to me in bed one night. It touched and talked to me. Any thoughts? This happened to me roughly over a year ago, and I still don't know what to make of it. Apologies in advance for the lengthy post, but I want to be thorough. For context, I sleep with the lights out in complete darkness. The only minimal amount of light, red, in my room is from my electronic clock on my nightstand. I've also had numerous encounters with the supernatural, but nothing like this. In the past, I've mostly seen relatives who are no longer with us or other human-like spirits and entities. Another detail will be more important later is that I'm currently writing a fantasy/supernatural book I've been working on since high school. So I just woken up and rolled over onto my side to check the time on my bed clock. It was a little past 3:30 a.m. I sat there for a minute, unable to get back to sleep. The next time I went to look at the clock, I saw something crouching beside my bed. It was a mostly black figure with a grayish hue to it. It was very tall, I'd say around 6.5 or 7 feet if it stood up, and long fingers that somewhat came to a point. It had no distinctive facial features or other definitive shape to it. The figure slowly moved up beside me in my bed, putting one arm around me behind my head and moving the other toward my chest. At this point, I'd rolled onto my back and tried to just stay still and hope it went away, and it didn't. The figure kept one arm wrapped around me and started stroking my face and lips with its other hand. The side of my face felt harm and like there was going to be a gentle caress, but it wasn't like the feeling of a real person's touch, not like skin on skin. Then it leaned into my ear, still stroking my face, and said, "You're taking too long to finish my book." The voice didn't sound either made by a male or a female, but rather just a soft, monotone sound to it. At that point, I was eerily creeped out and I'd had enough. I didn't get any aggressive or negative vibes from this thing. I just didn't know what the heck was going on. So I pushed its hand away and tried to, don't laugh, but bite it when the figure wouldn't move away. It didn't feel like I necessarily made contact with anything. It was kind of like trying to push two repulsive ends of magnets together. However, it shook its hand, as if in pain for me trying to bite it. After that, it slowly crouched back down and just disappeared into nothing. This was the first and last time anything like this has ever happened to me. Have any thoughts? I didn't get the feeling of having any particular connection with this entity. Not like I have when I've seen loved ones who've passed away. Don't believe it was a sleep paralysis thing either, because I was pretty much wide awake, and I only couldn't move, but I could move when I wanted to. What makes me feel really uneasy about this is that it was such a dark figure, the weird touching of my face and lips, and the eerie comment about me writing a book. I don't know what to make of this. Me and my friend saw a girl in a white dress. This happened around a decade ago in Central Europe, in a smaller city where I live. I went to walk with my friend to town in the center to just talk in the evening. That was our usual practice. Weather was comfortable. We were around 25. We were heading back to the middle of the talk, and I was listening. I felt a little weird. Something like someone gave me a little anesthesia or something. We were about to cross the road on Zebra, which is a roundabout with our usual moderate traffic and well lighted. It's an urban area. Diagonally to the left is church with a small green garden and bushes around, which somewhat block the view of the church entrance. There in front of the church, like 20 meters away from us, I spotted a girl, around 8 or 9, standing in a white dress, in something like a white nightgown. But the dress was torn apart, it had holes in it. Girl had arms, hanging, still next to the body. She had long hair also hanging, and she was looking straight down. She wasn't looking at us, but in front of the church entrance toward the road and the building on the other side. I had a thought that this was a poor girl from wartime. Then my friend interrupted me by jumping toward the road, which was at our right. He was on my left, so closer to the church. He mumbled something out of surprise. I forced myself to be very alert and realized that what might be happening, and I said to him, "I will not say anything now, but you tell me, what is it?" And he replied, "There's a girl in a white dress. I saw it." This is what scared me, and I was like, oh my God, I saw her too. But why are you afraid? She's just standing there, and there are people around. Then while we were crossing the road, we were looking toward that church entrance, and no one was there. And we just went forward as usual, past the bushes and the little road that leads to the church entrance, looking toward the church, and saw nothing. Then we continued walking home like nothing happened. That friend a few years later, after already finishing university, went to study to become a Catholic priest, and he is a priest today. At that time, he was still not sure if he could be a priest. When I was 6 years old, me and my family lived in a haunted duplex. Our cousins lived on one side and we lived on the other. I'm pretty sure it was the family that lived there before us that was haunting us. At least that's what I was told. So during that time, my dad would wake up very early in the morning, I think maybe 4 or 5, to go to work. All I remember was that it was still dark out. I was a daddy's little girl, so it was our tradition to wake up, eat breakfast together, and then he'd leave for work and I'd go back to sleep. Then one day I woke up and saw a dark figure standing at the frame of my door. It turned and left. I thought it was my dad, so I followed it out of my room, down the hall, but when I got to the stairs to go down to the living room, the lights were all off. I thought maybe my dad was in a hurry and just left without eating breakfast, so I turned around and went back to bed. This happened a few more times, and each time I kept getting up and trying to catch my dad. Then one day I confronted him about it and asked why he kept leaving and didn't wait for me. My dad became very confused and asked me what I meant. I told him that I kept seeing him walk down the hall and leaving without waiting for me. He became concerned and said he had quit his job for a while now. I think my parents knew something was off as I became very sick. It was in a very short span of time. I'd gotten so sick, I missed so much of schooling that the school said if I didn't go back soon, I'd be expelled. Our religion was shamanism back then. We believed in spirits and would pray to our ancestors. My parents enlisted the help of a shaman to perform a ritual to see if they could determine who or what the figure was and what it wanted. We learned it was the ghost of a woman that used to live there. The family that lived there before us all died in a fatal car accident. The shaman said she wanted to take my soul. For this to stop, for me to stop seeing the figure and get better, I had to stop following it. At the time, I was too young and my parents didn't want to scare me, so they didn't tell me. They actually told me this when I was much older. So that night after the ritual, my parents had me sleep with them in their room. I didn't question it because, kids. Again, I wake up and see the shadow, and I get up to follow it. But right as I got halfway through the hallway, my dad woke up and called out to me. "Mediocre trash bucket, where are you going? I'm right here." So I stopped in my tracks, turned around and got in bed and went to sleep. After that, I never saw the figure again, and I made a quick recovery. I think my parents took it seriously because later when my parents told me of what happened, my mom confessed that she had a dream that she and a lady she didn't know were arguing. My mom was in her bedroom and the lady was standing outside the door. The lady was standing in the shadow, so my mom couldn't see her face, but my mom saw her waist and below, and she was wearing a long skirt. She was yelling at my mom to get out of her house, and that my mom was yelling back at her saying, "This is ours now." At the time, I was never scared, never felt like anything bad was going to happen to me. But now thinking back, it gives me the heebie-jeebies. The house has been torn down now. It's not even there anymore, just flat land of grass. Whenever my siblings and I drive past it, we always say that it was probably torn down due to nobody being able to live in it because of the hauntings. When I was a mere 8 years old, I had an incredibly vivid dream that seemed to take place in a restaurant booth. 3 girls unfamiliar to me were sitting with me at the booth and we were chatting and messing around. Though the dream lasted a considerable amount of time, the details were somewhat fuzzy, including the place where it was set, and even my own voice sounded different. Being a quiet child with no friends, It was certainly an unusual dream, but as a child, I simply shrugged it off and forgot about it in time. Fast forward 6 years to when I was 14 and I had a girlfriend who invited me and 2 of our friends to an ice skating rink on Skate City. We had a blast and then decided to sit at one of the booths and chat and relax. Suddenly, it all hit me like a ton of bricks. This was exactly the same scenario as my dream 6 years earlier. The same 3 girls were there, sitting in the same positions, and even the booth had a glass wall to my right, just as I had seen in my dreams all those years before. What made it all even more astounding was that these girls were people I had only just met in the start of the school year, and I was living in an entirely different state at the time of my dream, with no knowledge of a place called Skate City. It was a truly surreal experience, as if I had somehow caught a glimpse of the future that was going to come 6 years later. Question about orbs. Let me tell you about an experience that occurred many years ago during my college days. Although some of the details have become a bit hazy over time, I remember it quite vividly. It happened to me in my 3rd year of pursuing my engineering degree, and it involved an encounter that left me feeling both perplexed and intrigued. It was an experience with an orb. It was a semester where getting to bed before midnight was a rare luxury. However, on this particular night, I managed to hit the early hay. But then, I suddenly woke up in the middle of the night around 3 a.m. to an unusual sound. The noise was so high-pitched that it sounded like a combination of tinnitus and a screeching violin. As I opened my eyes to look around the room, I saw something that I will never forget. A white orb with a red aura radiating from it, right at the foot of my bed. I tried to shout out in an alarm, but for some inexplicable reason I couldn't. As soon as I caught sight of the orb, the high-pitched noise stopped, and the orb started to fade away. It was an incredibly surreal experience, and at that moment, I was left feeling equal parts bewildered and scared. At the time, I chalked it up to stress and possible minor sleep paralysis. After all, I was able to sit up in my bed and look around my room. My roommate, who was sound asleep throughout the ordeal, appeared to be completely unaffected by it. However, this strange event that occurred in 2014 has stayed with me all these years. I've never had any similar experiences since then, but for some reason, it came back to me during my lunch today. As I did some research, I found that orbs are indeed a thing. I must confess that I'm not very experienced when it comes to paranormal activities, but I consider myself to be an open-minded skeptic, willing to explore and learn more about these phenomena. I've been trying to find more about these orbs and what they could possibly be, aside from just being a hallucination. Most of the information I came across pertained to the meanings of their different colors, but I'm hungry for more. I want to delve deeper into this fascinating world of orbs and to see what other mysteries it might hold. There was a restaurant in my hometown called Madison's. It was built in an old hospital. It's now converted to many businesses. Madison's and the rest of the bottom floor in particular had been the morgue. After ordering our food, my sister and I got into the habit of exploring the stairwells and empty hallways of the abandoned upstairs hospital. When we would get to the second flight of stairs, it was often taped off, warning the customers not to adventure any further. We would often jump this tape and sneak around, our little hearts beating in our throats for fear of being caught. One night we had jumped the tape, and we were peering around the corner of the hallway. We could hear someone coming. We quickly hid ourselves, but continued to watch the hallways from the little sliver of view we had. Along comes this nun. We only saw the back of her. She was methodically walking the halls and doing her rounds. We waited for her to get far enough away that we could run downstairs without being heard. I had assumed for years that there must have been some sort of religious or Catholic daycare or something of the sort on that floor. Fast forward about 10 years, and I'm randomly on Google looking up ghost stories and haunted places in my hometown. I see an article about a nun ghost who walks the halls of the old Catholic hospital that's now converted into restaurants and various businesses. I realized that there haven't been nuns since back in the early 1900s. At this point, it dawns on me that my sister and I saw back there, maybe it was a ghost. We weren't afraid at the time. She seemed so real. Ever since then, I believe fully that paranormal activity is a very, very real thing. I personally believe in these ghosts, and they only reveal themselves when they're the least expected and not instigated. A few are what I would like to call past life regressions. One day I was walking down the stairs in my house. I looked at my right arm and thought to myself, where's my cast? I've never broken an arm. Another one was when I was coming out of a grocery store, and as I walked about 10 feet away from the entrance, I said to myself, I need a cigarette, and suddenly tasted what I assumed cigarettes tasted like. I've never smoked. Both experiences were very, very vivid. I've had more, but these are the most bewildering ones. As for weird coincidences, this requires a little setup. My mom used to have a music box that I loved, and the music that played the theme from the movie Love Story. I studied abroad in Germany during university, and I lived in a number of big cities, and other big cities, you get buskers. I was walking past a saxophonist in Hamburg, and he started playing the theme. Funny, I thought, and went about my day. I was in Heidelberg. A guitarist, as I walked past them, started playing the song. In Frankfurt, in Stuttgart, always buskers, and always playing different instruments than the last day, and always starting just as I walked by. Finally, I hit Trier on my last stop. I'm walking and see a string quartet sitting down. Apparently, after taking a break, they raise their instruments as I get close. I thought to myself, if they play the song, I'm going to freak out. And just as I walk by, they start the theme. Not sure if buskers get together and decide on what to play on a national scale, but it was just strange. For what I believe is straight up paranormal, another story during university. I was walking down the hall to one of my classes, and I felt like someone was coming up behind me. Didn't hear footsteps or anything, just a feeling, just a reflex, so I glanced back. There was no one behind me, and I was the only person in the hallway at the time. I brushed it off and kept walking. I could still feel this presence behind me. Suddenly it felt like the presence was running at me, full tilt. As they reached me, I felt like something jumped on my back and was holding on to me. It felt like it had weight. I started freaking out, and all that was running through my head is that I needed to say the Lord's Prayer. I wasn't religious at the time, but I'd grown up in the church. I still have the Lord's Prayer memorized today, but for the life of me, I could not remember the words to it at that moment. I managed to get a hold of myself after a minute or two and started reciting it over and over again. After minutes of the Lord's Prayer, the presence disappeared. Never had an experience before or since like it before. Certainly could have all been in my mind, but I have no idea why my mind would conjure something like this up. My college apartment. The story is from about 4 or 5 years ago. So the story begins when I was going to college for automotive. I shared an apartment with 3 other guys from my class. It had 2 large floors. The main floor had the living room and the kitchen, and the upper floor had the bedrooms. We all worked jobs and at different hours of the day, so at any given time, there was maybe 2 of us to use the apartment at a time. But most of the time, I was in the apartment by myself because of my work schedule. When I was home alone, I would hear footsteps upstairs. When I'd be in the kitchen cooking food or in the living room watching TV or playing games, or when I was upstairs in my room studying, I would hear voices from downstairs. Most of the time, I would stop, and I'd look around to see if any of my roommates were home, but I wouldn't find anyone in the apartment. When this all started happening, I asked all my roommates if they had heard anything with the apartment when they were all home alone. They all had similar experiences. We all sat and talked about it for a little bit before we all went to bed that night. It was about a week or two after we all sat down and talked about it, and things started to get more weird. We would be woken in the middle of the night by knocks and other noises. We also started to wake up with random scratches on us, and some of my roommates started to get angry for no reason at all. So another roommate decided to sage the apartment, and as we were doing it, I was recording on my phone, and when we got done, we lifted the apartment for a bit, and I left my phone on the table to record while we were gone. When we got back to the apartment, it had a different feeling than it did before we left, a more calming feeling. So we went to bed. It wasn't until the next morning that I went over to the recording on my phone after I transferred them to my computer, and I was shocked what I found on the recordings. As I was listening to them, I found some EVPs saying things like, "Look here," "Go away," "Stop," "Leave," and more. Shortly after that, we all moved out of the apartment into a new one. Till this day, I have no idea what was or still is in that apartment. Backroad Ghost Car. Let me tell you a story that happened to me a couple years ago. It was a cold winter night and I was driving home from work. As usual, I decided to take some back roads as shortcuts, since it was the quickest way to get home. The roads were a bit icy due to snowfall, but I was driving cautiously, much slower than I usually would. There is a long stretch of road that I take every day, which has hills and can be rough sometimes. It has no houses, hunting camps or turn-offs, and it's about 3 or 4 miles until the next intersection. I had driven halfway up the first hill when I noticed a car, or maybe a truck behind me in my rearview mirror. As I was driving up the hill, they passed me, and I was expecting to see their taillight as they went down the hill, or on the short straightaway to the next hill, but I saw nothing. And I assumed that maybe they'd gone off on a road or crashed, so I slowed down and scanned the sides of the road to look for any evidence. I couldn't see anything, so I stopped at the bottom of the hill and put my 4-ways on. I got out of my truck with my flashlight and started walking up the hill, scanning the sides of the road to see if I could find anything. I reached the top of the hill, and to my surprise, there was no trace of a vehicle that had even passed me. I found no tracks, no skid marks, no evidence of a vehicle going off the road or even driving on except for me. I thought to myself that maybe this car or truck had gone off the road on the other side, so I went across the road, but I still found nothing. It was strange because the accidents on this road were quite common, but there was no sign of any actual vehicle that night. I couldn't believe what I had seen, and I was convinced that what I had witnessed was a ghost car that was stuck in a loop, repeating the night it had crashed. It was a haunting experience, and I still get shivers down my spine whenever I think about it. North Florida Deep Shadows. Growing up in Jacksonville as a kid, I was living about a mile away from the Timucuan Preserve National Park. Being that the area was known as a historical monument with Spanish forts and old naval bases, and battles being fought there in which tons of Timucuan and Spanish died, essentially in my backyard. Around the time of being 6 or 8 years old, I had night terrors met with sleep paralysis events in which I would see human-like shadows in my room. The latter only happened twice. During those 2 occasions, I remember seeing it emerge from the corner of my room, a nice dark corner, of course, and during the first event, it just stayed in place. It had no remarkable features, with only outlining of its body being the darker barrier that defined a human outline, a head, torso, legs, arms, and maybe hands. However, the second time the paralysis happened, I immediately had elevated heart rate and started panicking out of fear. I most likely woke from a nightmare. I was positioned on my left side with the shadow guy facing my peripheral on the right, and this time it started walking toward me, getting in my bed, and holding me with its hand on my chest. From that, I was in total panic to the point that I could hear my blood pumping to my ears, but after a while, I guess, I just fell asleep. I honestly don't remember. Even with all of that, I don't think I told my mom at the time, though. Now I tell her about both of these experiences all the time. She kind of just says, well, maybe that did happen. Or it could have been a vivid nightmare. Nowadays, I look back on it with a sort of mystified perspective. Growing up, our household was really stressful as a child. There was a lot of parental verbal fights on a daily basis, especially with my dad being an alcoholic. And no, he didn't abuse me, at least physically. But all of that did lead to a divorce when I was 13. I haven't talked to a therapist about this, but I feel like those events were likely a product of stress. As a bonus, whenever I talked to my dad later, he confirmed to me that he saw a squatting human figure up in the rafters while we lived there. Well, before he went through the DTs. Rest in peace to that man. My first ghost sighting. Recently, I've been ruminating on my experience with the paranormal, and it's led me to delve into the genesis of my eerie encounters themselves. As I recount my inexplicable encounter, I hope that my recollection of events can illuminate the mysteries of the unknown. During my formative years, when I was around the tender age of 7, my bedroom was situated at the terminus of a lengthy hallway, and my brother's quarters were adjacent to mine. Between our rooms lay a section of a wall that was innocuous and ordinary, or so I thought. One day, I was bustling down the hall to my room, a spring in my step and a smile on my face, when something unfathomable transpired. As I strode forward, my eyes scanning the area, I noticed an inexplicable phenomenon unfolding before me. A face. Yes, a face had materialized on the previously unremarkable wall that separated our rooms. This was no hallucination or mere figment of my imagination, for the visage before me was crystal clear, almost tangible. The face wore thick aviator-style glasses that were striking in their magnificence, curly hair on the sides that lent in at an air of sophistication, and a smile that cracked, and amiably yet eerily toothless. In that moment, I was seized by fear, and I sprinted back to my mother, shrieking about the alarming face that had appeared on the wall. My mother, ever the skeptic, retrieved a photograph of my great-grandmother and my Nana, showing it to me and inquiring whether the face in the picture was the same as the one that had startled me. I was struck dumb, for I had never laid eyes on the photograph before, yet it was undoubtedly the same face that had manifested itself on the wall. Despite my attempts to rationalize the incident and convince myself that it was a figment of my overactive imagination, I knew deep down that the face was as real as any other tangible object in the world. This was the genesis of my surreal journey into the realm of the paranormal. I'm waking up with random scratches on my body. This peculiar occurrence has happened before, and it appears to be repeating itself with no explanation. The circumstances are quite puzzling as it revolves around the manifestation of random scratches on the body. The memory of this phenomenon has been erased from the individual's mind, and there seems to be no plausible reason for it to occur. Approximately a year ago, the individual began to wake up with inexplicable scratches on their leg or hand. In an effort to understand this perplexing situation, they reached out to someone who was purportedly knowledgeable about the manipulation of energy. However, the person simply shrugged off the issue, suggesting that perhaps it was just a matter of clumsiness and maybe shouldn't be overanalyzed. The scratching eventually stopped, and the individual was left to move on, free from this eerie experience. However, just a few days ago, the individual had a troubling dream. In the dream, the same individual who had previously advised them on the matter was attempting to locate them, and they were compelled to hide from him out of fear. This person has been cut off from the individual's life for several months, but they still attempted to reach out. Recently, however, their attempts at communication have ceased altogether, and it's causing the individual to become increasingly anxious. To make matters worse, the individual discovered 2 fresh scratches on their tummy on the very same day that the unnerving dream occurred. To top it all off, the individual woke up today with yet another scratch on their face, adding to their confusion and frustration. The perplexing nature of this phenomenon has left them at a loss, and they're unsure if there's any point at attempting to unravel this enigma. Fourth Man Experience, Guardian Angel. I'm a 55-year-old female now, and I had this experience 50 years ago. I remember it clearly. My mother made me go with me while she went dress shopping at the mall. I didn't want to go. I'd rather have stayed home playing with my friends. But then we played outside all day and came home when the streetlights came on. But I had to go because no one else was home to watch me, and I was the youngest of 6 kids. We got to the mall, and when I saw a huge central fountain, I begged my mom to let me stay in the court and play in the fountain. This was before the internet, before people worried too much about serial killers or pedophiles. I was never really taught about the stranger danger. My mom wasn't worried about it either, and after I promised to stay by the fountain, she went into the dress store. I remember playing for a while, dipping my finger in the water, walking around the entire fountain, and listening to the sound of water. I don't know why, but I suddenly looked up and saw a man, probably in his 30s, with dark hair and black-framed glasses and a white shirt and jeans, brown jacket. He was about 30 feet away and walking in my direction. As soon as I saw this man, I heard a male voice say, "Go find your mother." It wasn't the man in the glasses. His mouth stayed closed. The voice came from right next to me, and there was no one there. While I pondered what it meant and who might be speaking to me, the man in the glasses got closer. The same voice spoke again. The man in the glasses wants to take the little girl. Go find your mother, now. The word now was yelled into my ear. So even though I didn't understand, and still don't understand what was happening, I got up from the edge of the fountain where I was sitting and started walking toward the store where my mother had gone shopping. The man was about 10 feet away now. Now the man in glasses spoke. He smiled a creepy smile that scared me, chuckled and said, "Ah, you knew what I was going to do, eh?" Then the disturbing chuckle again. This made me run into the store where I found my mom and grabbed her hand. She was surprised to see me. I was silent for the rest of the shopping trip. I didn't tell anyone about this until a few years ago. I told my mom. She thought it was good. I told my atheist, skeptical husband. He thought I was hallucinating. Personally, I have no clue. I don't know why this happened to me. Why would I be warned and saved from that man and possibly another kid? The articles I've read about the fourth man experience all have an element of extreme physical distress, like people climbing Mount Everest or trekking across Antarctica. This was not the case for me. What we believe was our daughter's paranormal moment as a toddler. From the time our daughter was about a year to just over 2 years old, we'd periodically get woken up by the sounds of her giggling to flat-out cackling and squealing in excitement. When either of us would get up to see what the fuss was all about, she'd be standing or sitting at any of the 3 sides of her crib, looking up. One day I was holding her and walking from each framed photo of the family members. I'd point to those in the pictures and say, "Who's that?" I pointed to her mom, myself, my mom, my Mill, my Sil, my brother, his wife. Each time she'd say her word for that person. There was a collage of a number of people, memories of the past, and my wife and I had made and framed it. There were family and friends who were no longer with us and who had passed on, including my father, who'd passed away maybe a decade before our daughter was even born. I started pointing at people, and if she didn't know them, she'd look at me real fast and hold up the palms of her hands like, "I don't know." So I'd point to the person again and say their name. She'd do her best to repeat it. In the collage was a pic of my late father and I. I pointed to me, and she said, "Dada." I pointed to my father, and she got all excited. She started bending her knees in my arm and raising up and down and giggling with the biggest smile. She raised her arms up in the air and looked at the ceiling and said loudly, "Papa, Papa, 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 Papa." She kept giggling and saying, "Papa." I had chills and my wife was looking at us with wide eyes. I started to tear up. For one, no one had ever shown her a photo of my father. We didn't have one hanging up in the rooms where she frequented. No reason. We just didn't have very many big photos of him. For two, she'd never said the word before, not ever. Lastly, my brother lives halfway across the country, and at that time he had only seen my daughter once. He has one daughter, but she was in college, and when we visited him, she'd never even met our daughter. But my niece spent a lot of time with her early in life, and around my late father before my brother relocated. Papa was what my niece called my father, and he loved being called Papa. Her reaction had my wife and I thinking, and admittedly hoping that maybe, just maybe, all those times we had woken up our daughter, giggling and laughing and squealing in delight, it was my late father paying her a visit. Had a strange experience walking home through the woods one night. About a month ago on a Saturday evening, after finishing a long day at work, I hopped off the bus to buy some beer from a large superstore, which was nothing out of the ordinary. As I walked towards home, I was faced with 3 possible routes, 2 of which involved walking down a busy main road. However, the quickest and most appealing option was to stroll down an old, disused wooden path that used to be a Victorian railroad track, which was surrounded by vast fields, and I resided in a rural area of England. As I made my way down the track, I heard a group of owls hooting away, which piqued my interest, of course. I decided to record some audio of the sound, as it was usually quiet down there. I continued walking, and as I approached a clearing, I saw the moon shining brightly through the trees with an eerie reddish tint to it. Without hesitation, I took out my phone to capture the moment. However, in order to take a clear picture of the moon, I had to switch off my torch, leaving me in total darkness. Just as I was about to snap the photo, I heard a loud and solid thud, as if something heavy had fallen from a tree behind me. The sound was so loud that it felt like it had hit branches on its way down before finally landing on the ground with a thud. The incident startled me, and although I'm not easily scared, I couldn't help but feel uneasy. Without looking back, I began walking back home at a quicker pace. The track I was on is a very old one that stretches for miles, and I had heard stories of people hanging themselves down there in the past. I couldn't help but wonder what had caused the sound. Was it a ghost of someone who had taken their own life on the track? Was it a petrified owl that had lost its footing? Or was it a peeping Tom who had dropped their camera from a tree? The possibilities were endless, and I couldn't shake off the feeling of unease as I walked back home. Can someone help me? I think there's a ghost in my house. It's been nearly 2 weeks since the paranormal activity began to unravel, and I'm still grappling with the inexplicable events that's left me questioning the very fabric of reality. It all commenced with me awakening from a deep slumber to find the closet door shut, and there was no one else in the room except for me. This was out of the ordinary, for I don't usually close the door, owing to its tendency to get stuck and become impossible to open afterwards. However, this time it was particularly silent. As if that wasn't eerie enough, a few days later, on a seemingly uneventful Thursday, I was engrossed in an episode of Ghost Adventures, propped up in the middle of my bed with my covers pulled up to my chest. Suddenly, the covers began to slip down, and I reached out to pull them back up. However, the moment I did so, I felt a weight on my legs, which were stretched out and straight up on the bed. I shuddered as a cold chill crept up my spine, and I quickly changed the channel to avoid any further distress. The following day, I stepped out of the shower. I caught sight of something that made my blood run cold. There were fingerprints on the mirror. I always lock the door when I'm showering to prevent anyone from intruding, so the appearance of fingerprints on the mirror was inexplicable and deeply unsettling. In the days that followed, there's been no new development, leaving me to wonder whether the unexplained events have ceased or something more sinister is afoot. The uncertainty of it all has left me feeling unnerved and vulnerable, and I can't help but wonder if the spirits of the departed have taken an interest in my existence. A few years ago, I had an incredibly vivid and unforgettable dream about my cousin who had already passed away. The dream took me to a beautiful garden filled with lush green grass and vibrant trees and flowers. I remember feeling the warm sun on my skin and the gentle breeze rustling my hair as I walked around the garden, taking in the beauty of my surroundings. Suddenly, I spotted my cousin who was leaning against a tree. I was supposed to see him there, as I knew he had passed away 6 months ago. I approached him and asked him, "What are you doing here?" He replied, "I'm resting." At the time, my son was sick and only 4 months old. My cousin asked me about my baby, and I told him that he was sick. Then, to my surprise, my cousin asked if he could take the baby with him. In that moment, I felt an overwhelming sense of fear and remembered that my cousin had already passed away. When I woke up from the dream, tears streamed down my face and I hugged my baby tightly. Although I couldn't see my cousin's face in the dream, I felt a sense of peace and happiness knowing that he was finally resting after a long and difficult battle with the illness and frequent hospital visits. But to this day, I remember that dream with incredible clarity, and it remains poignant and a reminder that there's a deep connection we share with our loved ones, even after they passed away. Unnaturally fast shadow figure. During the eerie night of October 31st, 2020, an unforgettable event occurred to me and a group of my friends while we were out and celebrating the spooky holiday of Halloween. It was a rather uneventful evening as we strolled along the streets, chatting and laughing, but little did we know that our night was about to take a chilling turn. Suddenly, out of nowhere, we spotted a mysterious shadow-like figure dashing from one bush to another with astounding speed. Each time it reached a bush, it would pause for a moment, waiting until we weren't looking, before moving on to the next one. With each passing moment, the figure crept closer and closer toward us, leaving us frightened and perplexed as to what to do as it got closer. Almost as if it was defying the laws of physics, its movements were incredibly odd and seemed to be crouching and taking abnormally long steps, with legs that seemed far too lengthy for any human. Eventually, the figure made its way toward a narrow alleyway, and it was there that I caught sight of it up close. It was an incredibly tall figure, towering above me at a height of around 6.6 to 7 feet. However, due to the darkness of the alleyway and the shadowy nature of the figure, it was difficult to discern its exact features. I was completely unnerved by the experience and decided to retreat back to the safety of my home. But the unsettling experience didn't end there, as when I arrived home, I noticed that the bins outside my house had been moved, sending a shiver down my spine. The hours passed, and there were no further sightings of the shadowy figure, but the strange and unsettling events of that night have remained etched into my mind ever since. Despite the fact that I have no concrete explanation for what we witnessed that night, I'm convinced that it wasn't a mere figment of my imagination. Many others have reported witnessing similar strange sightings in that area, leaving me to wonder if maybe there's more to this mystery than meets the eye.